to the Fit and Fabulous podcast with Dr. Jaime Seaman. Hey everybody, it's Dr. Jaime and welcome back to the Fit and Fabulous podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here. In case I sound a little funny to you, I just got fitted this morning for my Invisalign. So for the next 6 months, you get to hear me talk with these things in. Jay and I, my guest today, were just chatting about it before we let you all on. So I want to introduce Jay Golanello. He is known on Instagram as Perpetual Health. Jay found his way kind of in the health and nutrition space in an unlikely way than most of his colleagues. He actually has a degree in music production and engineering. He was an athlete, though, has a background in sports and became a certified personal trainer, was working in the specialty of fitness nutrition, and then just got really obsessed with longevity and how to have optimal health. And so he went on, started reading, going to conferences, partnering with doctors and PhDs and all these people, and decided to pursue a different course in his life. That led him to a Nutritional Therapy Association, where he graduated with his functional nutrition therapy practitioner. And then he also went on to get a master's degree in clinical human nutrition. He currently is working with doctors and nurses in New York City, helping people improve their nutrition, sleep, stress management, and of course, human performance and longevity. Jay, welcome to the Fit and Fabulous podcast.
It is a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you having me.
Okay, so everybody has a story where they started down one path and then there's this point in their life where they just have this off branching. And I find that in this space, everybody has like a personal story behind it. So tell us a little bit about really what inspired you to kind of pursue this different path.
I was just talking the other day with a friend of mine about this. It really is a long and winding road, as you said, like for most people, I think. My whole life, I've been a musician and an actor, so an artist, which is actually what I think, when you think about science, you think it's a hard discipline, but I think it's also the inception of science is creativity. So
it's really art. It's really art.
I totally agree. And I think when you're generating a hypothesis, a lot of that comes from curiosity. And so I went to Miami and I was doing a showcase as an actor, and an agent picked me up and said, if you move to New York, I'll represent you. And of course, who could say no to that, right? So I moved to New York, and the acting and music world isn't synonymous with steady income. So I became a personal trainer, and then I just realized that I couldn't get the results for my clients that I wanted without a better understanding of nutrition. And as I started to study nutrition, I just found a second passion. There was just something about the mechanism, and I guess the scientific part of my brain just developed a little bit later in life. And I have been studying independently and then formally since 2017. And I just finished my master's in human nutrition just a few months ago. So, here we are, and it's really been a lot of fun.
Congratulations. Okay, so I'm super interested to hear your experience getting your master's, because I have a background in nutrition and exercise science before I went to medicine, which is a little bit different pathway than a lot of my colleagues that got, biology or, chem degrees. I just remember thinking, what the heck am I going to do with a biology degree if I don't get into medical school? But of course, there's a lot of controversy in the low carb, ketogenic, carnivore space with nutritions and dietetics. So tell me a little bit about that experience. Like, were there things you were like, yeah, I don't really agree with that? Or was it like good? I mean, tell us more.
Yeah, that's a great question. What I think is interesting about the school that I chose, which is the University of Bridgeport, the oldest master's program in human nutrition in the country. And so, but it's functional medicine based, which was nice. So I found that a lot of the textbooks that I used at the Nutritional Therapy Association were similar to the ones that I ended up using. Now, as you said, of course, there were certainly things that I had to put aside, but going in with a little bit of understanding already, I was able to take on new information, but also, again, just kind of realize that some of this stuff may be outdated. A lot of classes in biochemistry, which people ask all the time, well, you studied nutrition, so you must have had a bunch of classes on food. And there was really only one or two, and they were honestly the most boring classes. The ones I enjoyed the most were the biochemistry classes and how things work. And that was every semester we had one of those.
Right. Yeah, I remember in our training, it was like Mediterranean dash,
Yeah.
like there's hypertension, there's cardiovascular disease, like this is what you use. And then I went on to do a fellowship in integrative medicine. And I love Andrew Weil. He's incredible. It was an incredible program. I learned so much, and I've definitely, applied a lot of these therapies in my practice. But even in his trainings, he's very much into this, what he calls an anti-inflammatory diet, which is kind of just a spin on the Mediterranean diet. And I think there's a lot of pathways to optimal health. And I think that's some of my displeasure with social media is I think sometimes we get into these little rabbit holes and the dogma of like, no, it's just about the calories. Like, no, it's about avoiding plants. No, it's about, and I think that, there's probably a lot of ways that different people can achieve optimal health. But just like tell our listeners, like, why is nutrition like what I kind of believe to be like the backbone of metabolic health?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's truly foundational. We put milligram quantities of medications, or supplements in our body, and they can have profound effects, but we eat, kilogram quantities of food every day. And to think that that doesn't affect our physiology it's naive, really. And it's something that we all have in common. We don't all have to take supplements, or some of us will never take supplements and never take a medication, but we all have to eat, as far as I am aware. So I think
the requisite for life.
Yeah, right.
Last time I checked.
I was thinking we recorded this on the wrong day. May 11th was Eat Whatever You Want Day. Believe it or not, that's an actual day.
Of course, like we need an excuse, like we need, a day.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought, well, isn't that every day anyway? And I was just giving a talk for Nurses Week at a local hospital, and my talk was centered around processed foods and the food environment. It was called Eating for Your Biology, Avoiding Evolutionary Mismatches. And so it was a combination of data, but also my hypothesis that I think that you're right, that we can achieve optimal health through a variety of different nutritional strategies. But one of the common themes, even in the vegan and carnivore community, should be the avoidance of ultra-processed foods. If we can do that, then we can debate maybe what may be more beneficial than another. I mean, I have a bias towards animal-based nutrition, but I certainly don't have the dogma that all plants are trying to kill you and that you can't ever consume a plant. I just don't find either of those extremes attractive. And, Weston A. Price, his work was amazing. And he never really found any strictly vegan or strictly carnivore tribes. There was some degree of change. Some were 98% animal-based, some were 98% plant-based, but we have the luxury of choosing what to eat now because we have supermarkets. But back in the day, what was available was what was available, and that's all you had. So yeah, I think to your point, nutrition is foundational because it's something that we all have to do. And again, we eat constantly, and so paying attention to quality is probably the most important thing we can do.
Why is that? I find that patients come into my clinic and they could actually tell me exactly what they're, when I say like, do you eat in a particular way? What's your diet like? And they're like, oh, not good. So they obviously have an idea of like what is good for them and what is not good for them. Like, why is it so hard for people these days?
Oh, so that's now you're talking my language. So I think we've created I've been using this term lately, this carnival type food atmosphere. Right. So when someone mentions to you a ketogenic diet, so part of my talk to the nurses, I highlighted things like intermittent fasting and ketogenic diets, because at the hospital, my population is not patients, it's actually doctors and nurses. So I was hired to improve the metabolic health outcomes of the actual employees at the hospital. So
like employee wellness, that's awesome.
Right. And it's actually kind of an amazing educational experience for me, because I learned what doctors don't know about nutrition, right? So you would know this. How much nutrition training did you actually get when you were in medical school?
Yeah, there's a handful of lectures, and a lot of it just really involves more like physiology, like the B vitamins or cofactors in this process, or, like when you're learning pathophysiology, but there's not a lot of like tell patients how to eat. And we have within the hospital system, we have registered dietitians that are on the team, they're formulating tube feeds or, whatnot. But let's be real. I mean, we've all seen a hospital tray of like what the patients get fed. And then within the hospital system, I mean, a lot of people know my story. Like I was, eating a lot of crap. I'm in the middle of the hospital when I'm working at night. I mean, I was eating like Oreo chocolate pudding cups because that's what was available in the convenience store at the middle of the night in the hospital, or I was going down to the Subway, or, I mean, it was just like super delicious food that was cheap and readily available. And that's what all the doctors and nurses ate. I mean, the break rooms at the hospital, like full of cookie and candy. And it was like, if there's nothing happening on shift, like we just ate because we were bored.
It's nice to know that it's consistent everywhere, because that's exactly what I see. The hospital break rooms, the kinds of foods that are available. When I see the carts being wheeled into patient rooms, I cringe, because that's not my, I can't do anything about that. But the reason I even took the job was I thought, well, if I can help educate doctors on what to eat and how food interacts with our body on a biochemical level, maybe, they'll appreciate that because they know biochemistry, and maybe that will filter down to patient care. And so that those doctors will then maybe be less likely to just recommend the food pyramid or the standard American diet, or even to some degree say that food doesn't matter, which, believe it or not, there are still some doctors that say nutrition doesn't really factor into the health puzzle, which is shocking to me. But to your point about super delicious food, right? Hyper-palatability, that is where I think we've gone off track. So I think we've hijacked nature to a point where there's a science built around this called psychophysics. And the gentleman who developed a concept called bliss point, his name is Howard Moskowitz, and he created Cherry Vanilla Dr. Pepper. He was hired by food companies for his expertise in food optimization. And that phrase is amazing to me. What are we optimizing food for? Or is it flavor? Is it health? Is it nutrition? He was actually even hired by the military after he left Harvard to help biohack soldiers into eating adequate calories because their rations were so bland and didn't taste very good. And so the soldiers really weren't eating adequate calories. So I think your point is spot on. We tend towards those foods because they're, one, readily available, and two, they are literally almost impossible to stop eating. The Lay's potato chip slogan, that you can't eat just one. I mean, they're telling you without telling you what's going on.
Yeah, I had I always ask my patients what they do for a living, and it kind of gives me an idea of like what their life is like, what their occupational exposures might be. And we have a really large company here in Omaha called Conagra, and they, are in the food industry. And this person worked as a food scientist, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm always fascinated about, people probably think gynecology is fascinating, but I'm like, oh, tell me more. Like, what do you actually do? And this person's sole job, full-time job, was to create the peanut butter flavoring for the cookies. Like, come up with the chemical combination that will make the, peanut butter patty cookie taste so delectable that you can't stop eating them. Like, this was literally this person's job. And I'm sitting over here like, how do you sleep at night? Like,
I know. Like, you're biohacking people.
So evil. Because they do taste good. Like, I'm going to admit, like, I'm a former carb addict. Like, it tastes really good. Like, they're hard to stop eating them. Yeah. But when it comes to sugar, Jay, they say, like, you hear people say it's very addictive. It's just addictive as cocaine. But then you hear these other people say, like, no, it's been well studied. Like, where do you fall in the, like, sugar is addictive, thought space? And then also, like, artificial sweeteners, maybe somebody that's eating a really good diet, but still drinking a lot of diet soda or something.
So I think it's a continuum. I see some people who I think sugar is a molecule that the body obviously understands, right? It's half fructose, half glucose. It's pretty simple. So if you're a very active person and you're metabolically well, sugar coming especially from whole foods, is not really a problem. But I've had some people in my office that have a BMI approaching 50. So when you're at that level, I don't think that it's responsible to tell somebody to just, watch your sugar intake. For some people, they really, because it's a psychological game. And so some people really just have to do some strict avoidance for a while until we can get them, metabolically well. And I don't necessarily address artificial sweeteners right away, especially if I'm trying to transition them to different foods. Although in the end, I don't think artificial sweeteners are very beneficial. And I see some people continue to gain weight even after they've switched to artificial sweeteners. So I know the research is controversial and some people will say it plays no role, but I just, from a experience point of view and from a clinical point of view, I disagree. I think that some people, for whatever reason, maybe it drives more consumption of other foods. Mm-hmm. I think you're playing a dangerous game when you're trying to outsmart the body. So one of the things I always try to do is just improve their nutritional strategy, so maybe up their protein intake, try to increase satiety so that they're less looking for snack foods. They're less looking for those quick hitting carbohydrates in order to either bring their blood sugar up or, again, emotional eating is a big thing. And I come into contact with that a lot. So I have to try to analyze, as you said, people's environment. Why, what are you doing for a living? Well, what are you exposed to that's driving you to eat these types of foods? And, again, I think sometimes people suffer from this illusion of choice. They think that a restrictive diet, like a ketogenic diet or anything like that, is restrictive, or a paleo diet, because it's only whole food based. But you just mentioned, I think you mentioned Oreos, and I was thinking, there's 84 flavors of Oreos. But before we came on here, I just looked up 2 flavors because I was curious if we're just being told that these are all different flavors, or if there's actually a different, set of ingredients. And I will tell you that I looked up caramel, cream, and birthday cake Oreo cookies. Let me tell you something. There's no difference in the ingredients. The dyes are the only difference. So then I started to think, I wonder if it's just our visual cues that are driving us to think that we have this amazing food environment full of all these choices. But the truth is, we're just being manipulated, and these really aren't any different. They're just a different set of dyes, a different set of colorings, and bang, you have birthday cake. It's kind of amazing.
I was talking to another food scientist recently and about a product that's in the space, and was kind of getting her opinion on it. And she was telling me that she worked for years in the candy industry. And she said you could take a gummy and put blueberry flavoring, right? And if it's blue, you're like, okay, here's the blueberry, it's blue, right? And then you can take the same flavoring, blueberry flavoring, and then turn the gummy red, and then put both of them in front of a, consumer. And because it's red, they can't pull the blueberry. It doesn't make sense to them, in their mind. So there's definitely more, we eat with our eyes, how pretty it looks and how, I think there's definitely something to that. And we know, just the cephalic phase of digestion, just walking into the donut shop and smelling it, and your body's starting to secrete hormones and to secrete digestive enzymes within your mouth. And I mean, it's the body's incredible. And even looking at circadian rhythm research, your body anticipates the times that you eat throughout the day, and will actually start to anticipate by upregulating certain enzymes, which I never, that was mind blowing to me, because most days I was just flying by the seat of my pants. When am I going to eat? When am I going to have time to eat? What should I eat? It's, the body's just fascinating to me.
And you can retrain those hormones. I worked a lot with people who would change from a night shift to a day shift. And those
we
people,
got to talk about this. Yeah.
Right. And so those people would wake up in the middle of the night with hunger cravings because that was when they used to eat. Right. But you can actually retrain those hormones. And so people think, when I talk about fasting with people, they are afraid because they think that hunger is an exponential increase, right? That if I'm hungry now and I don't eat, I'm just going to continue to get hungrier until I eat my arm, and that's not true. The truth is that you can reset those hormones. And I've seen people do it switching from those day to night shifts. And I think it's kind of amazing to see how that works. Sorry, I think.
Yeah, I'm super interested to hear your opinion, because you work with doctors and nurses at the hospital, and I get asked this all the time. I'm very lucky that my schedule, for the most part, is Monday through Friday, kind of, normal hours, 8 to 5. But of course, babies come at all hours. So there are times when I have to go in the middle of the night, deliver a baby. And if I get woken up between 2 and 3 a.m., it seems to be this magical, bewitching hour that if I have to go into the hospital, for 24 to 48 hours, my satiety is all off. I have more hunger. I've worn CGMs. I have more blood sugar instability just going to the hospital between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. what's your advice for people who are shift workers? Because you work with these nurses in the hospital, like that have to go like from day to night. Like, are there strategies they could use, like fasting, or like when should they eat? Like, what advice do you have?
So that's a really tough one, and it's very, very individual. When you wore a CGM, did you notice during those times anything specific in your blood sugar?
Yeah, there was changes in my blood sugar, and I'm just assuming that it was probably like dysregulation of cortisol, because for people listening, we're supposed to see a spike in cortisol about 30 to 60 minutes after you wake up. It's called the cortisol awakening response. It's good. Like cortisol is a good, like it gets such a bad rap, but it's purposeful. It's a great hormone. We need it, but it's supposed to spike right after you wake up, and then it's supposed to slowly come down throughout the day. And because of this cortisol awakening response, when you wake up in the morning, you actually have more insulin resistance when you wake up, which is why it's crazy to think that people sit down and eat like a giant bowl of cereal or oatmeal or whatever. Like you really, really, really should be limiting carbs for that first meal of the day. It really should have at least 30 grams of protein, in my opinion. But when I would get up between like 2 and 3 a.m., of course, like as soon as my feet hit the ground, I'm getting some gluconeogenesis, some, glycogenolysis that's happening. And so I would see my blood sugar kind of come up just from, plus, maybe the excitement of like going to the hospital and, you got called by the nurse and you have to deliver the baby. But I would just notice throughout the next 24 to 48 hours, I was more hungry. Like I was like constantly wanted to eat. I had no satiety, and my blood sugar just seemed to have a lot more ups and downs. Like there was just more counter-regulatory hormones. Like it was like I pissed my body off, and my body was trying to figure out how to find homeostasis again. And then typically what I'll do when that happens is I'll really focus on my sleep for a couple nights. I'm like, okay, I'm going to mouth tape. I'm going to put my blue blockers on. I'm going to like try to get, and then it seemed to kind of, fix itself. But I just imagine these nurses, because I used to have to work like night shift when I was a resident. And it's hard to like do it for, and my husband worked nights as a police officer, like to do it for a couple of nights and then go back to some kind of normal schedule for a couple of days and then like back to nights. Oh my gosh. I mean, we know the implications it has on health. It's really hard for these people.
I think focusing on sleep is one of the most important things. Even one night of poor sleep can cause some degree of insulin resistance and some fluctuations in blood sugar, which will kick in cravings. And so even just making people aware of that and saying, listen, if you go in on 4 hours of sleep, just be aware that day, you may struggle in areas. So those are the days where I tell people, make sure you pack your lunch, make sure you're vigilant on those days, and also retaining a normal sleep schedule. I know that sometimes night shift workers will do that thing where they'll alter their sleep schedule on their days off. And I understand that because, you want to be able to exist with other humans during the day when your day's off, but at least trying to be kind to those circadian rhythms, because that's really where I feel most of those issues occur, is when those disruptions are so constant. They just really, it seems to be cravings that they struggle with the most. So what I try to do is keep people on track on their days off when they can be in most control of what they're doing. And fasting is another way to build some resilience. They don't feel, once they've balanced their blood sugar and they've gotten used to fasting, they feel more empowered to be able to go through a night shift and not necessarily feel like they have to eat as if it's daytime. So let's be honest, I don't care what you do, how often you do it, that is antithetical to our biology. We're not supposed to be eating at that time. And so, but focusing on sleep and focusing on habits during the day when they're not working is one of the most important things. And it seems to work for most people if they can do it.
Yeah, incredible. Okay, let's pivot a little bit and talk about fat. Fat has gotten such a bad rap in the last, 20, 30 years in the diet, especially saturated fat. And what we've seen is kind of this replacement of saturated fat. And now we're seeing plant butters and all these things that are made with, canola oil, soybean oil. How do you talk to people about, fat in general, and then like how to pick what fats to eat?
So again, I have a bias. Man-made products are guilty until proven innocent. I always tell people that up front so that they don't, so they know where I'm coming from. I think it's important to let people know what your bias is. So, factory fats, no bueno. Animal fats, which we've been consuming, in the early 1900s, about 99% of our added fats were of animal origin. And so you fast forward to, the 2000s, and now about 86% are of plant origin. So that's problematic. And so one of my favorite things to do when it comes to this is I point out two older studies that were done in the 60s, but that their data was never recovered until recently, even within the last, I think 2016, the BMJ published these two studies that basically showed if you replace saturated fat with high omega-6 linoleic vegetable oil, by the way, there's no vegetables in those vegetable oils. That's just a brilliant marketing term. That if you replace those fats with vegetable oils, you will, in those cohorts, they lowered their cholesterol, but those people actually suffered from an earlier mortality. That's the Sydney Diet Heart Study and the Minnesota Coronary Experiment. You got to look them up. You got to understand the story. And the researchers were asked why they didn't publish their data. And they literally said, we were just so disappointed with the way the results turned out. And so to me, there's never been any real evidence implicating saturated fat. It's all been observational or, correlation. And I think that that's one of the biggest changes to the human diet we've ever encountered over the last 100 years. So to me, that part of the standard American diet is the experiment. Eating saturated fat we've been doing for forever, since man has sort of evolved. But these fats are brand new, and I think they're uniquely dangerous to the mitochondria. They're uniquely dangerous in a lot of ways, and they also tend to be pro-inflammatory. So people that cut those out tend to start feeling better in their joints, and they tend to just start feeling better. So even just getting someone to do that for a few weeks or a month, the light bulb often goes off, in their head, and they think, okay, maybe there's something to this, and it's not just science speak. There's actually a physical manifestation of me switching these fats and how important that can be.
Yeah. I just listened to a great talk by Rhonda Patrick this last weekend out at Metabolic Health Summit. And I think another take-home message is that if you consume them, at room temperature, that's one thing, but most of the time people are consuming these after they've been heated, which just really drives the oxidation. I mean, it's just like, it's an inflammation bomb for most people's bodies. And I tell patients, like, they're in every processed food that's in a bag, a box, a jar. I mean, like salad dressings, everything. I mean, you flip everything over, every kid snack. Like, I've got 3 daughters, like every, thing that is totally marketed towards my daughter's ages, which are like 7, 9, and 11, soybean oil, canola oil, sunflower oil. It's incredible when you start looking at labels, like how much these fats are used. So incredible. Talk to us, Jay, about glyphosate. Like, I've seen you do some posts on it before, and it's been very controversial, the use of it and how much of it is in our world and food and water. Tell us what it does inside of our body.
So there's very little that glyphosate doesn't do, and it's not, they say that it's not directly toxic because the enzyme that it essentially poisons is not, the human body doesn't possess this shikimate pathway, which is essentially an aromatic amino acid synthesis pathway. And that pathway creates essential amino acids like tyrosine, tryptophan, phenylalanine, these amino acids that the body uses. So we don't possess this enzyme, plants and bacteria do, so it poisons those enzymes. And so that's how it's sort of, I think it's wordplay that it doesn't really affect humans. But, to your audience, may be interested to know that it actually can disrupt steroidogenesis. So all of our sex hormones, it disrupts a protein called STAR, which is the steroidogenic acute regulatory protein. It also, hypothyroid tends to be a very common thing in females. I almost at least half of the clients I saw at the hospital had some underfunctioning thyroid. And I just said, tyrosine is one of the amino acids that's inhibited by glyphosate because it blocks that pathway. And so I think that, and then we can go into how it, impacts, it's a chelator. So it actually, you think of it as like a magnet, it will actually attach to any +2 cation. So things like magnesium, calcium, manganese, and now you're stripping potentially the mitochondria of its own endogenous antioxidant system. So you could be experiencing anything from hypothyroid to fatigue to issues with sex hormones. And I don't know many practitioners who do a test for glyphosate, but I do know a few, and they find that it's almost ubiquitous. It's almost impossible to find somebody that doesn't have some level of glyphosate in their body. So to have somebody be aware that some of these symptoms that may not go away, no matter how much you clean up your diet, no matter how much you exercise, it may not be something as simple as a macronutrient issue. It could actually be the fact that you're being exposed to this chemical that is in the soil, that is in the air, that is not just in the food. It's everywhere.
Right. I think, and glyphosate's just one example, but I have a new book coming out this summer and was, doing a lot of research looking at chemicals and endocrine disruptors. And it's amazing. We know from cord blood studies, we've looked at the baby's blood. So pregnant women, obviously interact with their environment. The amount of chemicals that they find in, this is the baby that's been inside her uterus, inside her tummy the entire time. So these things are, coming through the skin, being absorbed through the mucous membranes, and they're crossing the placenta and they're in the baby's blood. I mean, it's incredible, these chemicals that, and I, we use the word chemical. I mean, like water is a chemical, right? Like everything is a chemical, but these are man-made things. And one of the, like take-home points is that technology is amazing. But there's always a trade-off. Like there's always a trade-off when you mess with nature. And so these things are just really prevalent and they can really cause a lot of problems. And so you can't avoid them. I mean, you can't put yourself in a bubble, but, like what are ways that people, like, as far as like where they buy their food or food preparation, like what are ways that people can like reduce this chemical burden?
Right. I mean, your point is spot on. You cannot avoid them in terms of if you're living on the planet, at this point. Part of the problem is we also don't study them in any long-term meaningful way. A lot of the studies are just sort of, acute exposure studies. And the problem with a lot of these toxins is that they're chronic toxins, just like cigarette smoking. Yeah, you don't, if people smoked a cigarette and then fell over dead, it would be a whole different story. It wouldn't have been such a saga to try to figure out the connection between cigarettes, smoking, and cancer or anything else. It's the long play that we have to be considerate of. So obviously buying organic food, that's why, when people ask me, why does organic matter? Look, it's not perfect because, again, we don't live in a bubble, so glyphosate can drift. I mean, we just through the air. So an organic
like
food
any fruits and vegetables. You're saying like any fruits and vegetables, if you can buy organic, get organic.
If you can, I often have people go to the EWG website, the Environmental Working Group, and use their Clean 15 Dirty Dozen. So if it's on the Dirty Dozen, don't buy it unless it's organic. Just don't even, like strawberries are always on the top of that list. Just don't bother with strawberries if they're not organic. They're just one of the most heavily sprayed foods that we consume. So you can start there, buy as much organic as you can, even better if you can grow some food, in a little box garden. I mean, I live in, New York City and I can grow some things in my window. So, little things like that. And then also support. So, things like chlorella are great because they can potentially bind to glyphosate and help pull it out of the body. So activated charcoal, sauerkraut juice, believe it or not, some of these things are actually beneficial to removing glyphosate. And then just supporting your body's endogenous antioxidant system. So things like N-acetylcysteine or just your vitamin C, E, any kind of antioxidants that we can use to help minimize some of the damage that's being caused on the mitochondrial level. So it's sort of like a two-phase. You want to try to limit your exposure, and then you want to try to build up your defenses at the same time and see if you can mitigate it, and then test, don't guess, right? A glyphosate test is not very expensive. You can get a urine test for maybe a little bit over $100. So you could test once, make some changes, and then in 6 months, test again and see what the burden is. If you're heading in the right direction, that's a good thing. But I don't know many people who actually know their level of glyphosate exposure, and it kind of sounds like a fun experiment to me.
Yeah, I'm always willing to test and find out, but then as a practitioner, I'm always like, okay, what's like the clinical utility, right? You could you can spend a lot of money doing a lot of testing. Tell us how you eat. What's your diet like?
I mean, it's pretty boring, considering, we have 66 flavors of Pop-Tarts and 84 flavors of Oreos, and I don't eat any of those. But it's mostly, again, I would say it's animal-based, raw dairy, and then everything else is seasonal produce. So
can you get raw dairy in New York?
So I get it from a farm who delivers in the area, but I can't, it's not legal. You can't buy it in the grocery store. Yeah. So, but the great thing about a lot of these farms is they'll deliver, the Amish farms are amazing in Pennsylvania, and many of them deliver all around the country. And that's, and that can be expensive, but I really mostly just get my dairy from them because there's just a huge difference between raw dairy and store pasteurized dairy. I know a lot of people who have issues with store-bought dairy, but I ask them to try some raw dairy, and I cannot tell you how many people don't have an issue anymore.
Yeah.
Similar to glyphosate, right? When people eat, wheat, which is heavily sprayed in this country, in the US, well, then they go to Italy or they go to France and they try pastries and they say, Jay, I didn't have any GI discomfort. But if I come home and I go to Dunkin' Donuts or I go to some place and I eat, it's a totally different ball game. So same thing with dairy. I even find people who consume something like raw goat kefir, even if they have, or they think they have lactose intolerance, they actually are okay with raw dairy. So it's a very different animal. And I tell people all the time, if it's not for you, that's fine. We want to really take that bio-individual approach. You don't have to, it's not necessary to consume raw dairy in order to be healthy, but you should try it if you want to incorporate yogurt or kefir or even milk. But yeah, and then the vegetables and fruits are all seasonal. I don't consume a ton of them because I think there is something to the anti-nutrient paradigm. But again, I'm not fearful of fruits and vegetables. I don't really have any issues with them. But I always sort of do that in a seasonal manner. Just because you can get blueberries 365 days a year doesn't mean you should eat blueberries 365 days a year. But that's pretty much it. It's a little boring, but it works really well. And it's, I've actually been able to, I was an allergy baby, but I've actually been able to remove all environmental allergies, all animal allergies. I have no more allergies anymore, which is kind of amazing. It took a long time, but that's what it's done.
Wow. Yeah. My husband, since we've been ketogenic, he no longer has to take like Claritin, Zyrtec, Flonase, those kind of things. Yeah.
I love seeing that.
We've seen that too. Do you intermittent fast? Like how many times do you eat a day?
So that's a great question. I play around with that a lot. And I've been doing fasting since 2014 in one form or another, and started with just regular intermittent fasting, restricting to like an 8-hour eating window, which when you really think about it, I mean, I think an 8-hour eating window is really, you can still consume 3 meals technically in an 8-hour eating window. What I think what intermittent fasting did for me was eliminate the snacking, which was kind of nice. I just remember back in the day, it was, 3 square meals, and snacking was something that your mother told you would ruin your appetite. But now it seems like people want you to eat 6 meals a day because you want to stoke your metabolism, whatever that means. So I incorporate, say on the weekends, I'll maybe eat 2 or 3 meals, but during the week, it just helps me to be very productive, to be able to just have, 1 meal a day. But I don't recommend it for everybody. I think if you're having blood sugar dysregulation issues, females and males are very different when it comes to fasting. So I do think that it's important to get some degree of intermittent fasting in your life. I think, upregulating everything from the migrating motor complex, which sort of cleans out your GI tract in the fasted state. Things like that are very beneficial, upregulating autophagy. I don't think it's necessary for people to go to the extreme. People think, I got to fast. I'm going to fast for 3 to 5 days, and I'm like, whoa, it's not necessary to do that. Just some restriction of food intake, I think, is really beneficial for a lot of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you don't have to do it every day, which I think is awesome. Like maybe you just do it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you intermittent fast or something like that. There's still really good evidence that it can reduce your fasting insulin levels. And then I always tell people, like, it's just a tool in your toolbox. And
yes.
But it is a stress, just like exercise is a stress, just like sauna therapy, cold water baths, like whatever these like little biohacks or whatever you're incorporating in your life. Like it's not too much and it's not too little. Like I love like the picture for people that I like, because like, even though I'm a science major, and I say it's art, I'm always like, I'm not an artist when I'm drawing like a uterus or something for a patient. But this like idea of homeostasis, like the body doesn't want like too much or too little of anything. It's always trying to kind of find that middle ground and that middle road. And that's why we have to like, really just respect that these things are just tools, and like not one of them is by themselves magic. But I'm a huge fan too, because I think what it does for me is it reduces decision fatigue, having to plan out 6 meals and what I'm going to eat, or like pack that up, like not going to happen. I'm a mom of 3 and a professional, and live, I work a lot of hours at the hospital. So I love having the ability to only eat twice a day. And I prep a lot of my lunches and things like that so that I don't have to make that decision in the middle of the cafeteria, you know, of like what to eat. I just think it's such a great tool. Yeah. And for me, like, because I think women are more emotional eaters, I try to like avoid having anything in my house that would, you know, I always say your house should be like your safe zone. Like, don't like the hospitals and the drive-throughs and things like that are dangerous enough, you know?
It's one of the big things to get people to just stop, you know, and sometimes it's a person's spouse who, you know, is trying to do something nice and say, oh, I know cherry pie is your favorite pie. And it's like, so communication is important too, right? You know, if I'm trying to improve my metabolic health, maybe, you know, we could talk about not bringing home cherry pie, you know, for these 30 days or these 60 days. And so that I find that to be really important. And I love your point about it's a stress. It absolutely is a stress. So it's really about like the allostatic load, the you know, how much stress do you have going on in your life? If you're just a chill person and everything is going great and you got no stress, then yeah, then, you know, maybe fasting is okay. But if you are Olympic weightlifting and you're intermittent fasting and you're, you know, going through law school and you're, you know, we're going to have to scale back some of the stress because the body's not going to be able to cope with that. So yeah, it's very, very individual, which is why I don't like to see people say definitively fasting is the key to this, or you shouldn't fast because of this. I think it's just far too individual to be able to make those kind of blanket assumptions about people.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up this great topic about like recovering from stress and like resiliency. I think that that's something we live in, this just like fast pace, like go, 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 like don't slow down or someone's going to pass you kind of world. Like what are ways or things that you incorporate in your lifestyle to like recover basically?
Time in nature is one of the biggest things. You know, I've actually been playing around a lot lately with grounding, which was something that I thought was a little out there. You know, I mean, I'm again, you know, I come from the artistic world, so I don't automatically look at something and say, oh, that's ridiculous. I always entertain things, but I thought, oh, there's probably no hard science behind it, but it turns out there is. And you know, a few years ago, I had kidney stones, and that was a terrible experience. And I started doing things like after I would go for a run, I would start, you know, just spending 5 minutes with just my bare feet on the ground. And I was amazed at how I felt different levels of inflammation in my knees. You know, at the moment I have a right knee meniscus tear, and I'm still able to do everything, but man, just by grounding, I'm able to feel a different level of inflammation in my knee after I go for a run. So that's kind of a fun little thing that I've started to incorporate recently, and I've become a pretty big fan. I pay attention to my sleep more than, you know, to your point about, you know, it's go, go, go because someone's going to pass you, or I'll sleep when I'm dead. That whole mindset that I used to have, think about when I was a touring musician and I was, you know, up till 3 o'clock in the morning and then, you know, had to go to work the next day, or I don't do that anymore. Even going through grad school, I demanded sleep of myself. It was just as important in my routine as studying or as anything else. And then of course the nutritional aspect, I know my limits when it comes to, if I've suffered from lack of sleep, I know my tendencies the next day, like everybody, would be to start craving simple carbohydrates because you want to up that energy. And so I'm incredibly mindful of those moments. And I really try to, you know, eliminate, like you said, you know, eliminate them in the house at all, you know, don't even buy them, or eliminate the need to, you know, it's a lot more difficult to get somebody to go out. You know, if you have a craving, you're not necessarily going to drive all the way to the store, but if it's 5 feet away in the cabinet, it's going to get eaten if you're working on 4 hours of sleep. So those are some of the things, and honestly, getting a lot more sun exposure. You know, the sun up in the Northeast is finally starting to warm up. I mean, it feels like it was like the forever winter and spring, but you know, today it's going to be like 75 degrees and sunny. So after this, and after I finish working, I'm going to get some sun exposure, and yeah, just reconnecting with nature is a big part of how I handle all of those stresses. And again, you know, sleep and nutrition are obviously big pillars in my health world as well.
Yeah. Are you in the concrete jungle of New York City? Like, where can you go do grounding?
So luckily I live only a block away from the East River, and there's a little park there. And, you know, that's the place I do it. It's certainly not ideal. And, you know, I think soon I will actually be leaving New York. My dream is to open up a retreat center up in the mountains of New Hampshire.
Cool.
And I want to bring perpetual health into the real world and have people be able to come up and stay and be educated, have immersion therapy, sort of a whole, literally a holistic experience, be cooked for, the whole thing. So that will be amazing, because then I'll be able to ground on a daily basis.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'll come visit for sure.
You're going to come lecture.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll make it happen. Okay. So I end all my podcasts with something called the semen analysis. And I just recently shared about this new study that came out talking about hormone therapy, and it's off topic of nutrition, but it's something that I wanted to share on today's podcast. And, I get asked to speak a lot about the role of nutrition and metabolic health and hormones. And there definitely are strategies that people can use to mitigate the physiologic changes that happen in not only women who go through menopause with the loss of estrogen. The loss of estrogen actually causes inflammation in the mitochondria. It causes increase in visceral fat deposition within the abdomen. It causes age-related cognitive decline in the brain. And then men go through the same kind of phenomenon called andropause, where they start to lose their testosterone. I know, Jay, you've done posts before about testosterone and hormones, but I want to highlight the importance of hormone therapy. I think a lot of people in this kind of, low carb world are like very averse to like all medical interventions. Like, I don't want a prescription medication and things like that, but hormone replacement therapy is just like another tool in the toolbox, like we've talked about, that can help with longevity and aging. And one of the biggest risks that women will bring up is risk of breast cancer. And a lot of the things that Jay and I have talked about on today's podcast, like how you eat, the chemicals you interact with, how you sleep, alcohol use, all of these things have a way, way, way larger impact on your lifetime risk of something like breast cancer, which these days now they're saying it's like 1 in 5. It used to be 1 in 8 women. They're saying it's 1 in 5. We're seeing it at younger ages. It's absolutely terrifying. But hormone replacement therapy, estrogen replacement therapy, does not cause breast cancer. And this study just came out in the Green Journal, which is our American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. It was in the May issue of the Green Journal. It's titled Menopausal Hormone Therapy Formulation and Breast Cancer Risk. And they looked at data from 1995 to 2014. There was over 43,000 women who had been diagnosed with breast cancer, and they matched these with 431,000 women in a control group. So these are really, really large numbers for anybody that doesn't understand research. That's a lot of patients. And they did these adjusted analyses, and basically there was no increased risk of breast cancer compared with never users. So people who had never used versus people who had used estrogen, there was no increased risk of breast cancer with both bioidentical estrogens and animal-derived estrogens. That's another controversial area that people are like, oh, has to be bioidentical. We're not going to talk about it in the podcast today, but basically it didn't matter where the estrogen came from. There was no increased risk of breast cancer. The difference though, so if you have a uterus and you take estrogen, you have to take progesterone with it. And there was a difference in the study with synthetic progestins. So something like norethindrone acetate, levonorgestrel, versus micronized progesterone, which is like natural bioidentical progesterone. So there was a difference with the progesterone, but not with the estrogen. And so I just want to highlight this for everybody, this study that menopausal hormone therapy can be safe for the right patient, with the right formulation, for the right amount of time. Don't be scared away from it because of something you heard 20, 30 years ago that it causes breast cancer. So there's a lot of other things that cause breast cancer, and you absolutely should be scared about getting breast cancer. But the way you eat, the way you move, the way you sleep, the way you deal with stress in your life, those things have a way larger impact. How much alcohol you're drinking have a way larger impact on your risk of breast cancer over your lifetime. So I just really want to highlight that. Yeah. Any thoughts, Jay? I know it's not your world and your realm that you live in, but.
Right. It was one of the hardest things for me in school because it's so complex, and I give you so much credit for being able to synthesize all that information. But I didn't hear you talk from metabolic health summit because I don't think it's out. I did look for it. But you mentioned how estrogen impacts the mitochondria. And I know that we don't have a lot of time left for that, but in what way was that impactful? Because I am one of my major focuses is improving mitochondrial health, because I'm a big subscriber to the mitochondrial theory of aging. So anything that helps retain mitochondrial function, I think, is a positive. So, I was just curious on how that impacts.
Yeah, I don't have the study off the top of my head. It was in my slide presentation, but basically what we're finding out about like epigenetics is that the loss of estrogen actually changes something in the one of the promoter regions. Mm-hmm. And there's an increase in oxidative stress within the mitochondria with the loss of estrogen. And it makes sense, right? Because women lose the estrogen, they become more insulin resistant. They start increasing visceral fat deposition. Their brain cells, I mean, every woman who hits menopause is like, has these short-term memory. They're like, I can't remember where to put my keys. Like they complain of brain fog. And when we think about what's really happening, right, they're under metabolic stress. Their cells, their brain cells aren't firing like they're supposed to. Physiologically, they're more insulin resistant. They're depositing this fat, right? And so we just know that the loss of estrogen is doing something at the level of the mitochondria. And I think we're going to start to, find out more and more and more about this. But certainly you could replace estrogen. That's one option, but it's not magic. And we know that estrogen replacement is much better at prevention than it is at reversal. So if you're 10 years down the road and you have ungodly brain fog and your mitochondria have been stressed for 10 years, like it's not going to be that magical. But I think from a lifestyle perspective, it just gives us even more argument for these patients as they enter these perimenopausal years, like these nurses you're dealing with in the hospital and the doctors, really starting to prioritize, what they're eating, how they're sleeping, how they're moving, because it can mitigate some of these risks, especially, as they enter that decade of their life. I mean, we can't reverse age. That's, if somebody figures that out, I mean, there's people working dang hard on it, but certainly I think there's ways that we can function better, for however many years, that we have on this earth. So.
Right. And I mean, and mitochondrial health. So you still have to, I mean, you're going to be better off with a higher functioning mitochondria, regardless of whether you're choosing estrogen therapy or not. And so, right. And to your point that the mitochondria are already the largest site of reactive oxygen species in the body just through normal cellular respiration. So I would imagine that, again, nutrients that support the mitochondria, that keep energy production running smoothly and that limit the damage coming from cellular respiration is important. So it's really fascinating. And again, it always seems to come down to that. For me lately, it seems like everything I research comes down to that level of the mitochondria and keeping those little guys healthy. And so that's a really cool paper. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, if I can remember the day this podcast launches, you guys, I'll try and do a post on it. And the resounding theme at MHS this year was mental health, like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, like all of these things are really a metabolic disease. It was incredible to hear these metabolic psychiatrists and just like looking at the research and the connection between, our gut and our brain and our, mitochondria. It's because mental health is a huge problem, right now all over the world. And so it's pretty incredible the work you're doing, Jay, because I do believe that nutrition is like the one thing that you can do to impact your health in the shortest amount of time.
It's the only real tool other than some supplements, but it's the only tool that I really have. And in my presentation to the nurses, I said, that's why don't focus on a ketogenic diet as a weight loss tool. It's a metabolic health improvement tool that happens to have a secondary benefit of weight loss. If you chase weight loss, that may be all you get. But if you chase health, the body will normalize. You will find a set point. It will change your life. And one of the other slides I had was polypharmacy, and most of the drug combinations in people that are taking 5 or more drugs are to treat manifestations of metabolic dysfunction, which is something that I was able to affect simply by diet and lifestyle. So don't underestimate the power of diet and lifestyle. I think that's the if there's a take-home message, that's what it is. That we have a profound ability to impact our physiology by the food choices we make every day. And don't beat yourself up if you make a choice that's less than optimal, because literally around the corner is the next meal where you can change that. And it doesn't take very long to change the level of insulin resistance. I mean, quite honestly, just a few meals can change that. So I think that's incredibly important to understand how much power. I just love empowering people. And I think how much power you have by the food choices you make. I mean, there's nothing cooler than that, to see somebody change their health outcomes just based on what's in their shopping cart. I think that's quite honestly, one of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
Jay, tell people how to find you so they can follow you, so they can come to the Perpetual Health retreat when it happens, when we manifest this.
Absolutely. So the best, I'm most active on Instagram, which is Perpetual Health CO, like company CO. And my website is perpetualhealth.co. So I keep it very, very simple for people. And actually on the front page of that website right now, there is an ancestral wellness retreat page. So we're actually going to be hosting a retreat on Martha's Vineyard this October 2022. It's going to be very small. We have a very small room, probably only about 20 people, and it's about a quarter filled already. But it's going to be super exciting. We're going to bring some people down to talk. We're going to talk circadian biology. We're going to talk nutrition. We have a nose to tail chef. It's going to be a full weekend on Martha's Vineyard in October. It's going to be beautiful, and there's going to be a ton of practical things you can learn. There's going to be a lot of education. It's going to be a lot of fun. So come sign up, come hang out. It'll be an opportunity to pick my brain for a weekend. And it's going to be great. And in the future, it's going to be up in New Hampshire. We just chose Martha's Vineyard because we thought it was a nice destination for something in, if you want to get the full New England experience in October, there's nothing better. So yeah, Perpetual Health CO on Instagram and perpetualhealth.co is the website.
It sounds beautiful. All right. Well, Jay Golanello, thank you so much for coming on the Fit and Fabulous podcast. You guys, make sure you share this, share it with all your friends. There's going to be somebody that gets some good information. This is a fantastic podcast, by the way. So share it with all your friends, like it, download it, leave your reviews on Apple Podcasts. That does really help us, with the algorithms and getting this message out to more people. So we appreciate each and every one of our listeners. You guys have a great day.